By the fall of 1781, the American Revolution had stretched into its sixth brutal year. Battles had been fought from Canada to the Carolinas. Armies had starved, mutinied, retreated, and risen again. Britain still ruled the seas. America was still short on money, supplies, and certainty. Victory was far from guaranteed for the Americans. Then, on a quiet peninsula in Virginia, the entire course of the war squeezed itself into one final trap. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not one small step for man.
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
British General Charles Cornwallis had moved his army north from the Carolinas into Virginia in 1781. His task was to disrupt American supply lines and crush rebel resistance in the South. Eventually, he fortified himself in the small port town of Yorktown, waiting for the British Navy to resupply or evacuate his forces. From Cornwallis's perspective, Yorktown seemed defensible. It sat on the York River, giving direct access to the sea. The British Navy had not been defeated in any major way. Escape appeared assured. But across the Atlantic world, three separate forces were quietly aligning. General George Washington had spent years trying to force Britain into a decisive engagement. The war had become a grind test of endurance. Washington knew that if the British army could be surrounded and cut off from the sea, the war could be ended in a single blow. In the summer of 1781, Washington learned that the French fleet under Admiral Francois Joseph de Paul de Grasse was sailing towards the Chesapeake Bay. If de Grasse could block the coast, Cornwallis would be trapped. Washington acted immediately. He deceived the British into thinking he was preparing for an attack on New York, right? And then marched his army south in a rapid secret movement towards Virginia. French ground troops under Jean-Baptiste, oh man, this name, holy cow, Jean-Baptiste Donatien de Vemieux, Comte de Rochambeau. Well, he joined the march. By the time the British realized what was happening, it was too late. In September 1781, the French fleet defeated a British relief fleet at the Battle of Chesapeake. The British Navy retreated. Cornwallis was now completely cut off by the sea. And on land, American and French forces closed in from every side. Cornwallis's army of roughly 8,000 men was trapped between fortified earthworks and the York River, with no escape route remaining. And that noose around him tightened. And that brings us to the Siege of Yorktown. The Siege of Yorktown began on September 28, 1781. Washington and Rochambeau commanded more than 17,000 American and French troops. Artillery was brought forward, trenches were dug, day after day, cannon fire pounded British forces. Two key British redoubts guarded the outer line of the defenses. If those fell, the inner defenses would be exposed. And on October 14th, American troops under Alexander Hamilton stormed Redoubt 10 with bayonets in a night assault. French forces attacked Redoubt 9 at the same time. Both positions, they fell within minutes. Cornwallis's defenses were now shattered. And Cornwallis attempted one final desperate move. On the night of October 16th, he tried to ferry part of his army across York River to break through American lines. A violent storm erupted. Boats were scattered. Some troops reached the far shore while others were blown downstream. The attempt absolutely collapsed in chaos. With his army divided and trapped, Cornwallis had no remaining military options. And on October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis formally surrendered his army. America. America. British troops marched out between rows of American and French soldiers and laid down their weapons like they normally do. According to tradition, the British band played the tune known as "The World Turned Upside Down" as they surrendered. A fitting expression for what had just occurred. An empire had been beaten by a rebellion. Sounds like Star Wars. I love it. It was Star Wars before Star Wars was Star Wars. Though minor fighting would continue for about 2 more years, Yorktown effectively ended the war. Britain no longer had any political or military will to continue. Yorktown was not just a battlefield victory. It was the collapse of Britain's strategy in North America. It proved that the Continental Army could defeat professional European force in a decisive engagement. That's just Americans. They just proved Americans could whoop butt. That's really what they did. It secured French confidence in the American cause, and it forced peace negotiations that would lead to full independence. When the news reached London, Parliament erupted. One member famously cried out, "Oh God, it's all over." It sounds like the British. Yorktown was not won by luck or by numbers alone. It was won by patience, alliances, discipline, timing, and the steady resilience of a people who refused to surrender through 6 years of hardship and uncertainty. What began as a rebellion ended as a nation standing victorious on the world stage. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. And remember, as always, history isn't boring. It's the story of endurance meeting its moment. It's the story of a trapped army at the edge of a river that changed the fate of an empire and secured the birth of the glorious United States of America. We'll see you next time.